are 6 weeks into 2025, and already we have one of the most high-profile mayor's races in the country taking shape here in Massachusetts. Of course, I'm talking about the mayor's race here in Boston. Josh Kraft, the son of billionaire Patriots owner Robert Kraft, officially announced his candidacy for the top spot in City Hall. He's hoping to unseat Mayor Michelle Wu, the first woman of color to be elected to the position. In his first speech as a candidate, Kraft sharply criticized Wu for not listening to her constituents and failing to deliver on her campaign pledges from 4 years ago, namely implementing fare-free public transit, fixing public schools, and reinstating rent control. Wu has responded, quote, "I'm a little surprised that someone who's never even voted for mayor or city councilor before in Boston feels like he's ready to lead the city." I'm Laura Colarusso, and this is the Codcast, CommonWealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. I'm joined by CommonWealth Beacon reporter Gin Dumcius, who's been closely following the developments. All right, Gin, let's jump in.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the lead up to the announcement. You've written that Kraft's announcement was more than a year in the making, so give us a sense of what he was doing and how he was preparing.
Sure. Well, back at the November 2023, it was around Thanksgiving, the rumors had already been out there that folks were encouraging Josh Kraft to run. And I was at the State House for an unrelated event, and I noticed him on the other side of the room. I'll be honest, I had to Google. I had my laptop out. I had to Google to make sure that was him because I wasn't sure. As the event broke up, I kind of essentially chased him down the hallway and asked him. I said, there's this rumor out here, and he said, people have approached me about running. He didn't rule it out. And he said, I'm also going to become the chair of the Urban League, which is a local nonprofit. And now it seems a key part of his, maneuvering towards a mayoral run. But at the time, I kind of was trying to figure out what to do with this. And then I dug around a little bit, found out that company tied to his family bought a $2 million condo in the North End, and then later he registered to vote as a Democrat in Boston about a month or so later. So I've been tracking the would-be candidacy, since the early days.
That's great. So in this last year, how has he been maneuvering to shore up support?
Sure, he's been going out to all sorts of events across the city. He's been spotted at places. He's also been courting Wu critics, such as the liberal Julia Mejia on the city council. She's an at-large councilor, and also the more conservative-leaning Ed Flynn of South Boston. Ed Flynn was actually mentioned as a potential candidate himself, and he took himself out of the running several weeks ago, opening up a lane for Kraft. What's interesting, too, is that towards the end of last year, Kraft actually introduced Flynn at this fundraiser that was hosted by New Balance chairman Jim Davis. Davis is someone who's clashed with Wu, spent a lot of money to try to defeat her in 2021. So Kraft has clearly been meeting with a lot of folks who disagree with Wu and feel that they want to knock out the incumbent.
So it sounds like Josh Kraft is trying to augur his criticism of Wu from both sides of the political spectrum. I'm wondering what sort of reception that's gotten so far.
Yeah, I think it's a little early to tell, and I think actually it's interesting. As we were getting ready for the podcast, an email from his campaign just came in and said about here's who we're hiring as advisors, and one of them is a former aide to Julia Mejia, someone involved with the Jamaica Plain Progressives group. Another one, a longtime former aide to Mayor Tom Menino. His name is Michael Knievi. He's from South Boston. Again, one of the more conservative parts of the city, generally speaking. So the team he's also assembling seems to come from a couple of different corners.
So Kraft is ramping up, but Mayor Michelle Wu and her team has had basically a year to sort of watch what he's doing and try to prepare. How have they been getting ready for this?
Sure. Well, obviously, with any campaigns are expensive. She's definitely been fundraising, but she's also been keeping supporters engaged, giving them updates. I think there was a lot of, and I know this is kind of like we all do this in the media of the will they, won't they run, who's going to run when. And my sense over last year was there was never any question about whether Wu would run for re-election. If you just looked at how she was acting, there was a sign that went up in Chinatown, a new sign. This is like back in July that said re-elect Mayor Wu. If you translated the sign. So she's clearly been gearing up for re-election. She's known that she's going to face a challenger, especially a very well-funded challenger, which is, when I've kind of looked over the last 20 years, 30 years of Boston politics, is unprecedented.
Right. And in his announcement, Kraft took aim at a couple of key issues: the high cost of housing, which is perennial, rent control is a big part of that, buses that can't get to school on time. So, why is he focusing on these at this point?
Well, I think obviously, anytime someone is challenging an incumbent, it's because they think they can do the job better, right? And that's been part of his argument. He's proposing his own version of rent control, which is essentially a tax break for landlords that excludes luxury rentals. And with Wu, her argument has been that she's tried to do the best she can with what's been in front of her. The legislature has blocked her on a number of initiatives at the federal level. There's some changes coming that could affect city funding and all that. So, I think Kraft's goal here, as with anybody challenging an incumbent, is twofold, right? First, you have to make the argument that the incumbent isn't doing a good job, and the second part of that argument is, and you should replace them with me. And what a lot of challengers run into is that second part of depending on the voter and the specific person. So that's really kind of what he has to do to make this work, and it's unclear. We'll see in the coming months how well he can do it.
Right. In fact, Michelle Wu has already taken aim at his rent control, what he would call his rent control proposal, saying that tax breaks aren't actually rent control. So, what do you make of that so far? How the back and forth has been going between them?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of keys into this that housing, like in 2021, is going to be a huge issue in the mayoral campaign, and I think we saw that in 2021, not just on when it came to polling, when people were asked what their top issue was, but candidates when they were knocking on doors, that's what kept coming up again and again, and that's why they were suggesting policies. In Wu's case, it was rent control, and going back to the was it from more than 20 years ago what Boston had. That's why a lot of these proposals were put forward. So we'll see. This is obviously a very different world than 2021 in terms of what's achievable, but all that's going to get litigated in the next couple of months.
And it's traditionally very hard to unseat an incumbent mayor in Boston. I think the last time it happened was back in 1949. Why is it such an uphill battle?
Yeah, it's just people generally speaking in Massachusetts, they like their incumbents. It's also when you're talking about incumbents, usually they've had enough time to build up a war chest, to ward off any challengers or at least make it more difficult. In this case, it's a little different because Kraft, he's indicated he's going to do fundraising, but I think there's a lot of folks in the Boston political sphere who expect him and his family to pour in quite a bit of money. And I think if we look to San Francisco, that is what happened, where one challenger did spend 10 million of his family's money to get the mayor's office in San Francisco.
You've written about that race in San Francisco and how one of the heirs to the Levi Strauss fortune, I believe his name is Daniel Lurie, he unseated the first elected black female mayor of San Francisco, London Breed. So you bring it up, do you see parallels there, or are the two cities just too different to actually draw anything from that race?
Yeah, well, I'll say the top line is every city's different, right? I mean, we're looking at New York right now, and you've got the incumbent mayor who's in a lot of legal trouble. You've got a former governor who's talking about running. With San Francisco, what was interesting to me was that the argument that Lurie was trying to buy the election didn't seem to resonate with voters. At least, again, this is San Francisco. But the ways that San Francisco that race was different from here is that crime was a much more, it was a much bigger issue there. And London Breed lost union support in there. And that's just not the case in Boston. The unions are solidly behind Mayor Wu. And then the other factor, which can't be discounted, is probably the biggest factor, is San Francisco had ranked choice voting. And in that case, Lurie was able to make the argument of, if you're not going to vote me in the number 1 slot, please consider me for the number 2 slot. And that helped him in a lot of different areas of the city.
Okay, so going back to Kraft for a minute, you mentioned how his family could potentially donate quite a bit of money to his war chest. So that's not an obstacle for him, but what are some specific obstacles that he might have to overcome as a candidate?
Well, as a political, a newcomer to politics, I think that's kind of, there's always a learning curve with anybody who first jumps into politics. I mean, I think back to when Elizabeth Warren jumped in. She was a Harvard professor. She jumped in because she was driven to save the agency she created in D.C. And she had some stumbles in the beginning, but she really locked in, and obviously beat Scott Brown. Scott Brown, I will say also in that race, that was 2012, I believe, which that was a race that Michelle Wu worked on as a newcomer to politics herself. Massachusetts was inclined to hand that seat back over to a Democrat. I think if you talk to Scott Brown advisors back then, they would realize that he caught lightning in a bottle with his special election win over Martha Coakley. And that gets back to the other fundamental about Massachusetts. Democrats have a lot of power because they keep getting elected, and the electorate is fairly left-leaning. You can look at statewide elections too, where there's even been split ticket voting where Governor Charlie Baker won statewide, but he was also on the same ballot as Elizabeth Warren, and people voted for her too. So Boston in particular too is considered much more liberal than the rest of the state. That again gets to Kraft. Like, how does he make that argument? He says this is not about ideology, this is about getting results. But at the end of the day, if you're crafting yourself as someone, no pun intended, if you're putting yourself forward as kind of you align with the person you're trying to oust on a lot of issues like rent control, immigration, folks are going to say like, well, why should I toss the incumbent if there's really not that much difference between the two of you?
Right, but he's also courting real estate executives and people more in the business sector. So, I mean, given how the voting trends wound up in 2024, where we saw even very reliably Democratic constituencies move a little bit to the right, does Kraft maybe have an opening there?
We'll see. I mean, some of the folks, I mean, it comes down to who's voting in Boston, and some of the real estate folks who are upset with the mayor, they don't live in Boston. And, they'll certainly open up their checkbooks in whatever ways they can. And, I'm sure some of them will be supportive, but I think that kind of remains to be seen. The business community overall, they want predictability. They don't really like rapid change too much. So I think it remains to be seen who in the business community is backing whom.
That makes sense. And let's shift a little bit here to talk about Mayor Wu's record, because, the business community is one constituency, but there have also been other constituencies within the city of Boston that have not been so happy with the way the mayor has run the city. Thinking in particular of people who are upset about how she's handled White Stadium, that process, how she's handled the mass and cast issue with the encampments and how they were cleared. Some community of color have felt particularly not listened to. So let's talk about her record and what that might portend for the race.
Sure. I mean, when you're the mayor of Boston, there's always going to be folks unhappy, and I think that was true under Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh. There's always going to be policies that make folks unhappy. Whether that snowballs enough into ousting somebody, that's unclear, and that's part of the difficulty of ousting an incumbent. It's an unknown. I will say that there's really not been a lot of polling, at least public polling, on kind of her standing, and there really hasn't been a lot of polling on hot button topics like White Stadium. I think the last poll on her was about a year ago, and it basically said, she's doing pretty good. She's in the high 50s. That was the pollster's analysis. So I think that still remains to be seen. We're still in the early days, so I'm kind of curious to see how it turns out and how the two of them face off in debates and forums across the city.
Do you think she's at all vulnerable to the issues that Kraft has already raised, specifically housing? Might she have some difficulty making her case there?
I don't know. I mean, I think that kind of she really hasn't hit the campaign trail yet. She just had her third kid, a daughter, and and obviously she's got the State of the City coming up in March. I think we should look to that to see her really make the case for what her administration has done and also what it's looking to do. She's been clear that she's trying to reform the development process as well as overhaul the Boston school system. Neither of those are really short-term projects and just incredibly difficult things that she is taking on and trying to get done. And both those things, those are bound to have some people who disagree with the direction.
So shifting now to look at the national context in which this race sits, how might what's happening at the federal level affect this year's election cycle? Kraft's father, Robert Kraft, has been a Trump supporter, has given Trump money. I think there's a lot of consternation in the state about what's happening down in D.C. right now. So let's talk a little bit about how the larger federal picture might affect the Boston mayor's race.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing is, and I think we saw this with Marty Walsh during the first Trump administration, is the mayor of Boston will be in the news a lot. and often responding to whatever is coming out of Washington. So that already sets up a platform and a conflict that will be broadcast both, nationally and locally. And I think, there's a potential for some rally around effects locally, especially if she's standing firm on immigration and protecting folks who have come here illegally but haven't broken any local laws, in the sense of, that ICE is right now focusing on the violent criminals, and I think Governor Healy and Mayor Wu have said, obviously the violent criminals, they're fine with them being deported, but if you're talking about your average undocumented immigrant here, that to them that doesn't make any sense, and they feel they're confident in the legal protections there. Josh Kraft was asked about that, and he said that he supports the mayor in that. He supports the local law that was passed, the Trust Act. So, how much daylight there is on that, I think, again, like we'll have to get into the weeds. Every situation that comes up has the potential for a potential break or a potential, alignment. And I think that's what's going to be closely watched in the media. In terms of a macro level, I think this campaign is going to turn on, do people think Boston is heading in the right direction under the mayor? Do they feel the economy is in good shape? Even with housing being strained, do they feel that she's doing a good job? Those are all the answers that are going to get answered, because elections are often referendums on the incumbent.
Right. I'm curious, though, because just to go back to the question around immigration, how much Wu has been in the spotlight quite a bit for it. She's been called out by members of the Trump administration for saying that she would want to protect undocumented immigrants who are here and haven't committed any other crimes. And I believe she's also been subpoenaed to testify around this topic. So, I mean, her stature nationally could be on the rise a bit here, because she's going to be in front of the cameras down in D.C.
Right, and I think what she said is, DC is going to play politics. I've been thinking about something Brian Stetler of CNN kind of pointed this out, and this was from a 2017 New York Times article where Donald Trump during the first term was very much focused on, his stance was, I want everybody to act like it's a TV show, and I'm winning every single day, and that's an interesting way of looking at things where, obviously when it comes to TV entertainment, there's a hero and there's a villain, depends on where you sit. But I think Washington these days is very much focused on putting on a show, shock and awe and all that. And locally here, how people respond, I think that's going to be key. I think that's going to have a lot of ripple effects everywhere. But again, there's just so many unknowns, and that's kind of, honestly, it's been one of the frustrating things about covering the last month or so, is because most folks are trying to take it one day at a time and trying to figure out where to step in, where to say something. It hasn't been easy to track because there's so much coming.
All right, so as we look out across the rest of 2025, Gin, are we expecting anyone else to jump into this race? Could there be any surprises like that, or do we think that the race is pretty much going to be between Wu and Kraft?
I think those are going to be the two heavyweights we're watching. There's almost always some other candidate that might jump in. I'm thinking of there's a gentleman in the North End, Heraldo Mendoza, who he's upset with the mayor over outdoor dining. He's a business owner, so who knows if he jumps in. He said that he wants to jump in. We haven't seen him take any more steps towards that since last year. And there's also a perennial candidate, Althea Garrison. She runs every cycle for something, whether it's state rep, state senate, city council, mayor. She actually, when Ayanna Pressley went to Congress, because Althea Garrison was the runner-up behind, the fourth, or I think it was the fifth place person, she slid into the empty at-large slot, so she was also a city councilor for a period before losing the next election cycle. So there's always a possibility of another candidate, but to answer your question, these two are going to be the big two, and they're going to be the ones everybody's going to be watching.
Great. Thanks so much for your time today, Gin.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to reporter Gin Dumcius for joining us today on the podcast, and thank you for listening. I'm Laura Colarusso, and our producer is Claire Wigglesworth. You can leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to help other folks find us. You can also email us at codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org. We'll be back next week.